I realized today that our Yu-Gi-Oh! Cube is over 10 years old, and in that time it's undergone a lot of changes, and I thought it'd be pretty cool to talk about some of the cards that were too powerful and were banned from the cube. This is sort of like a hall of fame in terms of iconic cards that created really unfair interactions or just deemed too powerful. Now, obviously, with the power curve of the cube, there are tons of cards that are too strong, but a lot of these are ones that you may not have expected to be on the list. So starting the list off is Revival Jam. There's a couple reasons why I decided to pull this one out. Having 1500 attack is one of the strongest beat sticks, and the fact that it could revive itself and be a level 4 was really what just made it a little bit too powerful in terms of being able to get into those upper tier extra deck cards faster than you otherwise would. There is a card in the cube currently, Glacial Beast Blizzard Wolf, which is very similar to this card in terms of its application. It's what I consider to be the strongest beat stick in the cube currently, so that may wind up getting removed. But anyway, that's why Revival Jam is here starting off the list. Next, we're going into Golem Sentry. So this is another card where you can flip summon it and set it back face down, and every single time you do, you get to return a card to the hand. It has high defense, so that's one of the things that initially drew me to the cube. But there was this one time where we had a duel, and these were two cards in the opening hand, and I was unable to get over it. Basically, it started off with a T set, and then I set something, and then Ryan flipped up Golem Sentry, returned my monster to the hand, attacked for 18, set it back face down. And then when I tried to attack it so that I'd be able to at least leave it in attack mode, he flipped up Astral Barrier, and so it created like basically an unkillable lock, and so that's not very interactive, not very fun. So actually both of these cards are removed now. Golem Sentry could reasonably see its way back in. It's a good way of handling extra deck monsters, but all that considered, I still think it's a little bit too powerful. Astral Barrier is another card where if you are winning, it's a good way to protect your stronger card, so it's not necessarily better when you're losing, and so for that reason I decided to remove it. Next on the list is Jurak Terra. 1500 defense again, bounces something to the hand. Very similar thematic card to Golem Sentry, and its defense could get really strong. I felt like this card created just a little bit too uninteractive game states, and so it's not in there. A lot of these cards at the beginning of the list could theoretically get placed back in. As we get down to the bottom of this pile, you'll see some of the more cards that they won't be making their way back in. These are recent bans. Nobleman of Crossout and Mystic Swordsman level 2. When one of the main ways to claw yourself back into the game is by setting a monster face down, being able just to completely ignore that and destroy it if you're ahead was not very fair. And so for that reason, both these cards gave the winning player a little bit too much of an advantage, so they're both removed from the cube now. Next, I'm going to talk about a series of 3 cards. These are all tuners that were in the cube at one point or another. Currently, they're all out. These could make their way back in. There's sort of like this fine balance between the amount of how easy it is to special summon and extend to overcome a threat versus the power curve of the cards that are available. And so right now, I think that we're at a good spot where we don't need this much additional speed. All 3 of these tuners can revive themselves from the graveyard. And so being able to just very quickly come back into the game was something that I decided to remove for the time being. They also add a little bit of complexity. And I don't want to have too many graveyard effects either. These could all feasibly come back in at some point. Going way back, Reptilian Naga used to be a member of the cube. This is a card that you would think, I think just having complete immunity in terms of being able to not be destroyed by battle is a little bit too strong. And then the fact that it reduces every monster's attack to 0 if it battles it is just a little too much. So yeah, it put itself in attack mode. But this is also a card that is used by Ryan in his Reptilian deck. So just in terms of having a diverse number of cards, we decided to get rid of it. Black Garden. So this card's really interesting. It sort of creates the sort of game states that you like in the cube. The only problem is that the strongest beat sticks have 1400 attack. So they would get cut down to 700, and this creates 800 attack tokens. So that's not very fun, where every single monster you summon is too weak. Like, it basically is sort of like Future Visions, where you're just going to be setting everything. So for that reason, it's just kind of an annoying card. Gaga Cowboy. This is another one where I remember we had a really great back and forth game, and then I realized, oh, I can just end it by Cowboy for game in defense mode and burning for 800. And that's how I won that game, and that wasn't very fun. And so basically any burn cards are removed from the cube. If there's any potential to just like win through burn, it's automatically removed. There are currently 2 cards in the cube that do burn. One is Dark World Shackles, which burns for 500 during every standby phase, and the other one is Cobra Jar, which when the token that it generates is destroyed by battle is killed, it burns for 500. I think those are definitely sort of ticking time bombs. Eventually, someone's going to win by burning through that damage. Right now, I don't know if it's enough of a problem to actually do anything about, but yeah, burn as a whole is not something that I feel is very interactive. Speaking of not being very interactive, this is a card that I love. When a monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon a token that has 100 attack and defense onto the field. That was the main reason why this card was too good. It didn't seem like it was that powerful on paper, but realistically, it just made it so that one player would take way less battle damage than the other, so it's pretty warped and unfair. So for that reason, it's out, although I wish that the cube was able to support a card like this. We've gone through plenty of iterations with Cyberjar, where there's a time where both players had one copy of Cyberjar in the deck as a way to like come back and add more randomness into the cube. It added a little bit too much randomness. I did like the fact that it had a built-in Dark Hole, because it sort of can be removal, as well as it can also be like a stall card. Like, it just has a lot of versatility. But ultimately, I didn't like how much randomness it introduced to the game. I feel like it was at 1 for a time. Maybe it could come back. I feel like now we're sort of reaching the point of like cards that I don't think they're ever going to make their way back in though. Next, we got Donzalug. Donzalug was definitely the strongest normal summon in the cube for a while, even more than Golem Sentry. If you had this card, best thing you could do is just set it on the field. Anything's going to run into it. You'll rip a card out of the hand, then you'll put it in attack mode, and it'll most likely be able to rip a second card out of the hand. So he's just a little bit too powerful for what you want a single main deck monster to be able to do right away. Basically anything, this is sort of like the benchmark of if it does something more than this, it can't be in the cube. Endless Decay. I can't forget the one time that Ryan was losing by a lot. He special summoned this onto the field and then equipped it with Megamorph and hit me for 8,000 damage in 1 turn. It's the only OTK that's ever happened in the cube. And, I'd prefer if the duels went 20 turns or longer with chip damage. So because of that, we decided to get rid of both of them and really curve back the amount of damage that could happen in the cube. Now it's really hard to do more than 2,000 damage in a turn, which is great, and it makes it really fun. Getting onto some of the powerful extra deck monsters, we have HTS Psyhemoth. This was definitely the strongest one that you would basically always go for it. If there was ever like a card that was just the obvious one to go for, typically I would want to remove it so there was a little bit more variety. And this is just, maybe if this had the actual stats of DD Warrior Lady, it would have been fair. A level 6 with 1500 attack that could vanish after damage calculation, that might be fair enough for the cube. Being 2400 though, being able to beat over most things, even if they were equipped with a spell or boosted by some other way with another card effect, was just too powerful and gave you too much advantage. There could be an argument for putting 2 of these in the cube and making it a little bit more fair, but that's not really the direction I wanted to go with it. Next up is Cairn Gorgon. This is another card that basically made it very challenging to interact with it fairly, and so the player that summoned it, just like this one, would run away with advantage. So it was mostly just like a race on who could summon out a card like this first. Being able to push targeting from card effects over to other things made it very difficult to kill, and it had a really high stat line. Maybe if this had 1500 attack, it may be fair, but I actually don't know. Next up is Shockmaster. So, to no surprise, being able to remove interaction isn't very fun. So even for 3 level 4s, you could argue, for that amount of investment, it's a fair payoff. But you play Yu-Gi-Oh to have fun, and there are enough challenging little locks to be able to break through. And so being able just to negate all trap cards or something was too powerful. Solemn Judgment. We used to also run cards, like Torrential Tribute and Mirror Force and things in the cube. All of those are gone now. Solemn in particular, because just having a 1-card negate for any amount of life points, this is sort of one where the player that had this in their deck was going to wind up winning just by being able to have 1 critical negate. Now all the negations are -1s, Dark Bribe, Magic Jammer, and Ultimate Providence. Armades. From a really classic era of the cube, this was like the go-to level 5 synchro. Being able just to stop all of the opponent's effects while it attacked. It was basically free extension and into a cube where the core design philosophy is having interaction through the battle phase. This basically just turned off the main reason why the cube even existed. So love the card, it's really cool, but yeah, it was too powerful for what we were trying to do in the cube. Magical Scientist. There's definitely a time where we were focusing much more on the comboing of the extra deck. We had things like Glow Up Bulb and whatnot in the cube, and Magical Scientist just being able to pull out level 5 and 6 fusion monsters broke one of the other core mechanics in that the levels of a monster should be sacred. So something like a Gaga Magician would even be too strong in the cube because the power curve of the extra deck is related to the level of the monster. And so being able just to get out a rank 5 or 6 Exceed was, too powerful. I still agree with that. Maybe if this had a once per turn on it, it would be okay. But yeah, it was pretty funny just seeing a card that's like, this is the most broken card in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so it's still too broken even for a really watered down cube. All right, these are the only 2 remaining cards. Invoked Raijin. During either player's turn, you could change a monster to face down defense position. So having really good stats. Basically, it's impossible to beat over because anytime the opponent would try to interact with it, you would just stop the interaction. You could argue that this is actually worth it for the amount of investment, but I still felt like it was a little bit too uninteractive. And I mean, it's really cool art. Like, I love this thing. Look at that. But yeah, too strong for the cube. And the strongest card, the most banned of all banned cards, is Supremacy Sun. This was in from day 1 in the cube, and it took about 8 years of playing before we came to the conclusion that the player that summoned the Supremacy Sun always won the duel. No matter what happened, it was just a little bit too sticky. Having 3,000 stats and being able to come out turn and turn again made it a little bit just too powerful. This exists right at the cusp of the power curve for the cube. Maybe one day it'll come back in. You could do a cube challenge where one player has this and you have to try to construct the best deck to be able to overcome it. But for all those reasons, Supremacy Sun is too powerful. And that's the whole list. Love to hear, if there's any other cards that you were expecting to see on the list that weren't there, but I feel like this really covers some of the most, gives some insight into how the cube has evolved over time in terms of its interactive ability.